I knew I was being tormented because I had opened a door to something I didn't understand, and now it haunted me. That night something seemed different. The air in my room was heavy, suffocating. I felt a presence, the something invisible but real. My eyes were closed but my mind was alert. That's when I realized I couldn't move my arms, my legs, my own body seemed to be tied by invisible chains. I tried to fight and open my eyes. I tried to scream but no sound came out of my mouth. An indescribable terror took hold of me. My heart raced and a chill ran down my spine, for I knew this was not a dream. Something was happening, something that was beyond my control. Suddenly I felt as if I was being ripped from my body. An invisible force was pulling me away. My spirit was separating from my flesh and the sensation was frightening. I looked down and saw my own body lying there motionless as if I were dead. That was when I realized that something much bigger than I imagined was happening. I was being taken to an unknown place, a place of darkness, a place I never thought I would see with my own eyes. The fall began. My spiritual body was pulled down with an indescribable speed. The wind howled around me. It was a cold, cutting wind filled with voices that murmured words I did not understand. The shadows moved around me, shapeless and hideous shapes. They continued as I spiraled down. The darkness was absolute, but deep down something was shining. It wasn't a light but an intense reddish glow of evil. And then the screams began, screams of despair, screams of pain and wails that echoed from every direction. The heat became suffocating, unlike anything I had ever felt on earth. It wasn't just physical heat, it was a fire that seemed to burn the soul, consuming everything inside. I tried to hold on to something, I tried to resist, but there was nothing around me but emptiness. The smell of sulfur and rot took over everything, an odor so strong it seemed to invade every part of my being. My heart was beating frantically and my mind was screaming for help. I wanted to wake up, to go back to my body. I wanted this to be just a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't. I knew something terrible had happened, and then I got there. My feet touched the hot ground and a sharp pain shot through my body. The ground was not firm but made of red, incandescent embers burning everything that touched them. The heat was unbearable, as if invisible flames were enveloping my skin, penetrating to the bone. The air was dense, laden with a nauseating smell of burning flesh and sulfur. With every breath I felt my chest tighten as if something was sucking all the oxygen around me. Despair began to take over me. Everything inside me screamed to get out of there, but there was nowhere to run. I looked around and saw shadowy shapes moving in the darkness. They seemed human, but they were deformed by pain and suffering. Some were crawling, others writhed in impossible positions, and they all screamed. They cried out for help, begged for mercy that would never come. They were screams that seemed to have no end, a symphony of horror that echoed from every direction. Some stretched out their hands in my direction, their empty eyes reflecting only torment and perdition. But it wasn't just suffering. What I saw was something beyond the physical. It was the complete separation from God, the absolute distancing from the light of hope, of peace. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't. Something forced me to see every detail. Twisted bodies amidst the flames, tongues of fire that rose from deep valleys, horrendous creatures that walked among the condemned, laughing and mocking, feeding on their suffering. Some of these creatures were enormous, with sharp claws and eyes shining like embers. Others were small, deformed, agile, jumping on those who were there, tearing their skins, tearing apart their spiritual bodies. With each moan the demons seemed to feel pleasure, as if they were feeding on the eternal pain of the souls trapped there. I wanted to run and escape. I wanted to wake up and discover that all of that was a nightmare, but I was there, feeling every detail, seeing each grotesque scene. It was then that I heard a voice that echoed throughout that place, a voice so powerful that it made all of hell tremble. My heart stopped. I knew that voice. I could never forget it. The whole of hell trembled. The fire roared louder, the screams grew louder, and the shadows retreated in despair. It was then that I looked up and saw something that contrasted with all that darkness. An intense and immaculate light tore through the darkness like a flaming sword. The presence that emanated from it was overwhelming, not only of power but of something that I did not expect to feel there, holiness. My spiritual body trembled, my heart accelerated, and hot tears ran down my face without me even realizing. I knew who it was. There was no doubt it was Jesus, but he was not smiling. His gaze carried a pain that I could not understand, a deep sadness that seemed to weigh on all eternity. He looked at me seriously like someone who sees a soul-late regret. Then I saw the men and women trapped together, chained in pairs, burning without stop. They tried to free themselves, but it was impossible. Their spiritual flesh mingled as if they had become one, but now instead of pleasure it was pure torment. The fire consumed them without rest, and with each new flame that engulfed them their mouths opened in deafening screams. They struggled, they pushed each other, they tried to escape from each other, but it was too late. What before was desire and lust had now turned into their own curse. These are the ones who gave themselves over to fornication, Jesus said, his voice full of pain and authority. They exchanged eternity for moments of pleasure. They lived without an alliance, without commitment, thinking that their bodies were theirs, but they forgot that every sin against their body is also a sin against me. My soul tightened around hearing his words. How many times had I myself thought that my body belonged to me? How many times had I ignored the warnings telling me that it was not acceptable? But there they were, being consumed by their own choices. I couldn't look away because I knew that this was the reality that no one wanted to see. Jesus extended his hand once more, and before me the valley of fornication began to disappear amidst smoke and flames. But before I could even catch my breath, my vision opened to a new, even more terrifying scenario. The ground shook beneath my feet. Suddenly I found myself in front of a gigantic circle of fire. The flames were not ordinary. They seemed alive. They danced in shades of red and black, writhing as if they had a will of their own. The heat was suffocating. But unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was something that burned inside. Something that directly reached the soul. Inside this circle were thousands of people. Men and women of all ages. They writhed in pain. Their hands desperately tried to cover their eyes. But it was impossible. It was as if they were forced to keep their eyes open, even against their will. Then I realized why. Their eyes were on fire. Burning non-stop, a fire that consumed without destroying, bringing only pain, despair and eternal torment. They screamed. They tried to tear off their own faces, but they couldn't. I could feel their agony. The endless despair. These, Jesus said, his voice filled with sadness, are those who fed their eyes with impurity, gave themselves over to pornography, masturbation, and the uncontrollable desire that drove them away from me. They allowed profane images to poison their souls, becoming slaves of lust, prisoners of their own vices. Now what they saw in secret consumes them forever. My legs weakened when I heard that. How many times had I thought that this was a small sin without major consequences? How many times had people justified it by saying that it did no harm, that it was something natural, but there they were, consumed by the same desire that dominated them in life. There was no pleasure there, only pain, only anguish. What had once been an escape, a refuge, was now an endless condemnation. The flames around the circle of pornography began to die down slowly, but the screams of pain still echoed in my mind. My heart was heavy. My soul seemed crushed by the horror that I was witnessing. But Jesus, without saying a word, stretched out his hand again, and suddenly a new scene was revealed before me, an extensive valley covered by a dark mist full of shadows that moved frantically. I heard hurried footsteps, desperate screams. I looked closer and saw a group of people running away without direction. Their faces were marked by fear and despair. I didn't understand what was happening until I heard the most terrible sound I had ever heard, evil laughter that echoed like thunder. Then I saw them, demons, horrendous grotesques of different shapes and sizes, chasing those people like hunters after their prey. They screamed, mocked, threw chains over those who ran, pulling them back to torment them. Some were chained by the neck, being dragged like slaves. Others were held by the arms and legs without any possibility of escape. I saw a man fall to the ground, his face distorted in absolute terror, as a creature with red eyes and sharp claws launched itself on him. "You betrayed your wife," the demon screamed, laughing as it dug its claws into the flesh of that man. "Now see who possesses you." The man screamed in pain, his voice a mixture of suffering and late regret. But no one there had relief. There was no escape, there was no way to go back. The betrayal they had committed condemned them, and now they belonged to something much worse than their passions and desires on earth. Jesus then spoke, his firm voice but full of sadness. These are the ones who broke sacred covenants. They exchanged true love for momentary pleasure. They destroyed families. They deceived their spouses and dishonored the covenant I made with marriage. Now they suffer the consequences. Their words cut my soul like a blade. I knew that adultery was a grave sin, but I never imagined that the punishment would be so severe. Looking at those condemned souls being hunted and tortured by demons made me realize that nothing remains hidden, and everything that was once done in secret was now revealed in judgment. The valley of adultery began to disappear before my eyes, but the screams of despair still echoed in my soul. My heart was beating fast. I felt a crushing weight on my spirit. Before I could pull myself together, Jesus extended his hand once more, and suddenly a new scenario opened up before me. The flames burned more intensely, the heat was suffocating, and a smell of burning flesh filled the air. I saw human figures contorted in agony, their faces completely distorted by suffering. They were men and women who screamed desperately, their mouths open in an endless clamor. It was then that I noticed something terrible. Their bodies were being consumed by fire, but it was not a common fire, for it moved in a strange way, going up and down their bodies as if it had a will of its own. With each new flame their screams became louder, more intense, more unbearable. Their skin regenerated. Some tried to cover their bodies, hide their nakedness, but no longer there were more clothes. There were no more masks. There was no more pretense. These, Jesus said with a deep sadness in his voice, are those who used their bodies to lure others into sin. Sensuality without holiness has become a snare of destruction, and now they themselves are consumed by the desire that they spread in the world. My legs weakened when I heard his words. I remembered how many times on earth sensuality was promoted as something common, harmless, even admirable. How many times I myself ignored the warnings. How many times I saw people using seduction as a weapon, as a means to conquer, manipulate and deceive. Now before my eyes I saw the end of those who lived to be desired, to incite passions and lead others into sin. The women who once used their bodies as an instrument of seduction, now they cried, they screamed for help. Men who cultivated a predatory look, who made pleasure an obsession, were now trapped in their own traps. Demons walked among them, laughing, mocking, whispering words of humiliation. What once was pleasure was now pain. What once was desire was now torment. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I needed to see. I needed to understand. The scene before me began to change again. The flames of the valley of sensuality and seduction began to dissipate, but the screams remained echoing in my mind like a warning that would never be extinguished. My heart was beating faster, and a part of me wanted to close my eyes, but I knew I couldn't. I was there to see, to witness the truth that so many ignored. Jesus didn't say anything. He just extended his hand once more, and in the blink of an eye I was transported to another place, a valley different from any other I had ever seen. What I saw made me shiver. It was a dark valley where the only light came from flames coming out of the valley ground, as if hell were breathing the smell of sulfur that was suffocating, and an inexplicable cold ran through my spiritual body. That they were men and women tied by black chains, their bodies burning without being consumed. They screamed, cried, they struggled, but nothing could free them. The chains were attached to stakes driven into the fiery ground, as if hell itself held them captive. But what caught my attention the most was what they screamed. We did what we wanted. No one could tell us what was right or wrong, they cried out among themselves. But their words were loaded in despair. I saw familiar faces, people who on earth proclaimed total freedom, who said there were no rules, that everything was allowed. Now were the living forever the consequences of their choices. I saw demons walking among them, pulling them by the chains, laughing, mocking. Some of them held broken mirrors, forcing those souls to look at themselves, but the reflection I saw was not human. They were distorted faces, erased without identity. They had rejected who God created them to be, and now they were trapped in the form of something they did not recognize. Jesus looked at me with sadness and said, they rejected the truth and chose darkness. Now they live in it forever. His words cut my soul like a blade. They were not there because they were deceived. They were not there because of a mistake. They were there because they chose to deny God. They chose to defy creation. They chose to live according to their own desires without fear, without regret, and now there was no going back. I felt a deep pain inside me. How many on earth were still following that path, believing they were free, when in fact they were walking towards eternal chains? While I still looked at those souls chained in the darkness, a different feeling took over the environment. The suffocating heat of hell seemed to lose strength, and a soft breeze, almost imperceptible, passed by me. My eyes turned to Jesus, and his gaze was intense, full of something I couldn't explain. It was love, it was pain, it was justice. I felt backwards as if an invisible hand was pulling me from that terrible place. The flames slowly went out, the screams began to become distant, and everything around me began to disappear amidst absolute darkness. My soul seemed to be dragged at high speed, rising as if it were returning to the surface after drowning in the abyss. My heart was beating fast, and a mixture of relief and terror took over me. Hell disappeared, and then in an instant I felt my body again. My eyes opened and I was in my bed, but I wasn't the same. My body was shaking, sweat was running down my face, my breathing was uneven. I sat up quickly, trying to understand what had happened.